Without further delay, coming to tonight's session on lessons learned in building a growth team and how to get started. Let me give an introduction to our acclaimed and admired speaker of tonight, Nancy Hensley. Nancy is the Chief Product and Marketing Officer at Stats Perform, a global sports tech company based in Chicago and London. Nancy currently oversees the product, innovation, design, and marketing teams. She joined Stats Perform in 2020 from a long career in big tech at IBM Corporation. At IBM, Nancy held a number of leadership roles that spanned across technical sales, development, marketing, product growth, and digital. Throughout her years at IBM, she remained focused on data, analytics, and AI. Nancy previously served as Chief Digital Officer at IBM Data and AI prior to joining Stats Perform. In her years of technology, she has served as a passionate advocate for women in tech and leadership, working as a mentor both internally at IBM and externally with organizations like Women Unlimited. Today, she continues that passion to promote women in leadership in sports and sports tech. She lives in Chicago area with her family. A very warm welcome to you, Nancy. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here with us tonight. Handing the session over to you now.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Let me share my screen here.
Yep. I will have to stop sharing for that. Give me a minute.
Okay.
Yep, you can go ahead and share your screen.
All right. Let's see here. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, great. We can see that.
All right. Okay. So thank you for being here and spend some time with me. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my insights around growth, which is I think an evolving product role that's coming up. It really started more in marketing, evolved more into product, and I'll share some of my insights in building the growth team in IBM, as well as some of the core principles of growth and growth hacking. So we'll start with a little introduction about who Stats Perform is. So just give you a little bit of background on my company, cover what the basics of growth hacking is and some of the principles, some of my lessons learned, and how you would actually get started and some of the things you would consider when you have a growth team. And I'll be sharing with you the insights that I actually shared at the Growth Hackers Conference not too long ago. So you'll be getting some of the insights that people paid some very decent entrance fees to get. So we'll look forward to that here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about who Stats Perform is, give you a little bit of background on my company. The roots of Stats Perform actually goes back to the 80s when a gentleman named Bill James set out to really challenge how baseball was measured in terms of statistical analysis. He wrote up a publication called the Baseball Abstracts, and he actually crowdsourced through a project called Project Scoresheet, which is what our company was born from, a crowdsourced way to get event and statistical information about a baseball game. That actually was the inspiration for a very famous movie called Moneyball that Brad Pitt starred as Billy Beane. And Bill James was one of the founders of our company. And so that was really the roots of who we are. And then as we evolved how people look at sports and experience sports, we had many of the first in the industry. So we were the first to power a scoreboard because as fans became much more interested in getting statistical information around the game as a part of their experience, we also were one of the first companies to track data from an actual event itself. And then in the early 2000s, the broadcasters like CBS really started to embrace statistical and analytical analysis around games and match, as well as how we actually experience them change, where streaming, which is how so many people enjoy sports today, actually goes all the way back to 2002. We were one of the first ones to stream a match. Today we stream 27,000. So we're one of the biggest suppliers of streamed sport content in the world. We also laid the foundations for looking at things differently again in the early 2000s with some metrics that you guys might be familiar with if you watch football, which is expected goals. And again, these are ways that different kinds of metrics and analytics that people just didn't embrace in the previous years. And that's been our whole challenge, is to really challenge the way sports is measured. Also that decade, we began to power sports books. So we're the ones that when you go into a sports book, you see the data streaming across the screen. That's likely us. If you ask Alexa or Cortana, or you do a Google search, that is us as well. So we started to actually work with big tech very early in terms of helping embrace the search experience, both through voice and through what you see on Google today. And then as we continue to evolve, we were one of the first ones to optically track a game. This is with the NBA. And that has further evolved today, which what you see here in the middle, I'll go one step further here, which is what you see today with now we can actually do that, pull data, optical tracking data through computer vision from broadcast. And then also, I skipped it here, but I'll see if I can go back. Oh, I can't go backwards. Our edge analysis tool was helped the Croatian team get to the World Cup. So using, again, in-depth analysis that no one's used before helped a team in a country of 4 million get all the way to the World Cup. So constantly challenging how sports is measured, how we look at things differently with data analytics, and then of course recently introducing our body pose and AutoStats data. So just a little bit of background about Stats Perform and who we are. Let's actually jump into growth hacking and growth. So let me start with some basic definitions about growth hacking. So and you can call it growth hacking, you can call it growth. I think in the recent years, we've really dropped the hacking part because it's kind of gotten a bad rap. But what it is really is it is a way to do experimentation across every aspect of the customer journey. It's not a big bang approach like some people might think. It's really a bunch of small experiments that you do and look for opportunities to optimize growth along every aspect, whether it's how you're found on the web, how you experience the download and the trial, how well you actually can onboard a client, your pricing, the colors of your button on your web page, your ability to retain a client with new features. All of that are opportunities to expand growth for your product. And then with growth hacking, you're going to scrutinize everything you do. So you want to break everything down to small experiments and chunks of analysis and really overly scrutinize, be 100% data driven. So what this does, because you're crossing the entire customer journey, is it blurs the lines of product management, product marketing, digital marketing, data science. In fact, back when I was at IBM and I was kind of bouncing in between product and marketing, my boss would always say, look, do you want to be in product or do you want to be in marketing? And my answer would be yes. So when I got into growth, it was for me, the culmination of being able to take advantage of all of the things that I loved. And I don't see how you can actually effectively separate out product and marketing and grow a product. With my team at Stats Perform, we're all under myself as the CMPO. And I think that alignment is really, really key for growth. Let me give you a couple of a very easy example of what growth hacking is. So for those of you who don't know what Tupperware is, so Tupperware is a container that a lot of Americans use to put food in after, as leftover food. And it actually goes way back to the 1950s when a gentleman named, I think his name was Edward Tupper, introduced the product. When they introduced the product, they introduced it in the big department stores, and it literally would sit on the shelf and people would pass by. They didn't really know what to do with it. And then he hired a salesperson named Brownie Wise. And she said, look, I know how to grow this product. What women like to do is get together and have a few smokes, have a few drinks, be very social. We'll do a Tupperware party and I'll show people all these great products and how to use them in their homes. And we'll just take the orders that way and go to market that way. Well, that ended up being the way that Tupperware went to market still to this day, and how many products actually do. Lots of pyramid organizations that sell through a large on the ground group of salespeople, anywhere from Tupperware to lots of cosmetics products like Mary Kay, for example, all embrace this party approach. That is actually a growth hack. So we've been doing it for years. We just didn't really put it into a category or give it a name. But when you think about growth, you really have to think about it as a treasure hunt, and that it can happen anywhere, and you have to be very open and you have to look for the clues. And so as a growth hacker or as somebody in growth, you want to be insanely curious all of the time and look for those opportunities. Let me give you another maybe more recent and relevant example. We're a sports tech company, as I mentioned, and you're probably wondering like, okay, well, what happened to a sports tech company back in when COVID hit and sports literally stopped? Like, what happens then? How do you define growth? So this is a good example of how you have to be very open-minded. So finding growth for us in the midst of a pandemic we had to look at things very differently, right? We had to rethink what growth meant in COVID to us. We had to continue to drive relevancy and eyeballs to our site. And so we had to think about, how do we do that? There's no sports. We do sports analysis and there's no sports to analyze. But when we realized we have to go back to our core, which is we have a ton of deep historical data. That's what we do. We tell stories with that data, and we have a large data science team and AI team that does prediction work and a lot of analysis on top of that data. So let's tell some stories. So we started to write these stories. 200 stories later, we started to get an amazing amount of traction about a month into it. It was driving about 20% of the traffic to our site when there is literally no sports going on, no sports, hardly any sports betting. We thought, okay, well, let's see if we can get some traction here. And we opened up a bot to capture people who would sign up for this content to be delivered to them. And the bot allowed us to just scale 24/7, another growth hack, so to speak. We had over 2,000 subscribers in just a few weeks. And then we expanded on that and went to things like creating game analysis shows when sports started up, starting up with Twitch shows. We kind of expanded on this whole idea of storytelling on top of our data. So that was a great growth hack for us in the midst of a pandemic when there was really no sports. So hopefully these examples help you crystallize what it means. So let's talk about some core principles of growth. Couple things. So one is product market fit. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. You really need to focus on product market fit as a foundation for growth. We also talk a lot about North Star metrics and growth. So how do you actually measure success? I'll give you a couple examples of this. In Uber, it wasn't the number of drivers they hired. It was the number of rides, because rides actually measure their ability to get more people into cars and having enough drivers to drive those people. So it wasn't the amount of, it was the number of rides booked, which basically helped them measure both. That was their North Star. So that's what they went for, X number of rides booked. And that's how they measured success. Testing and experimentation. Growth is all about testing and experimentation, right? It's just rapid experimentation. We started off very small in IBM. We got up to several tests that we were running per week, and your ability to manage those, manage the results, and really double down where you find optimal results and learn from the failures. The failures are just as important as the things that you do really well at. Let me go back to product market fit for a second. Product market fit is absolutely the foundation of growth. And as I'm starting to build the growth strategies here at Stats Perform, that is exactly where we started, was getting the cultural shift around product market fit. So let me tell you what that means. When we build products, we often have a very one-dimensional view when we build products. It might be like, we're going to build this, let's get some client feedback, and let's see what the competition is doing. The reality is that that's not going to be good enough. What you really have to do is focus on, what do you do best from a product perspective? What do your customers need? What is that unserved need? And what is the competition doing? And find that intersection where there is an unserved need that the competition is not actually addressing. So it could be that you do that in a way that there's a different kind of design, you do that in a way of a different kind of a user experience, a slightly different type of product. Let me give you an example. I think it'll help crystallize this a little bit for you. Everybody knows the iPhone, and some of us are waiting impatiently for our iPhone 12s to arrive. But if you recall back in the day, when he introduced the iPhone, he walked onto the stage and he said, I'm introducing a new device. It's a music player and it's a phone. It's a music player and it's a phone. Apple didn't set out to just create another phone. They saw people walking around. They had a very targeted view of their segment, which is really important for product market fit. They saw people walking around with two devices in their hands, their iPod and their phone. And they thought, wow, wouldn't it be nice if we could create a product that allows people to combine both those devices, so you only have one? That's the unserved need. How they differentiated was through the design. They made the design so completely different, so beautiful, so easy to use. That's how they differentiated, and how everybody else followed suit. That is a great example of product market fit. So again, the unserved need was people had 2 devices. Apple thought they should maybe just combine those devices. And then the differentiating factor was that they did it through design. They made the design so unique, so beautiful. So they knew their targeted segment, which was iPod users who had cell phones, very specific they were going after. That's really important for product market fit. They knew exactly what they could deliver to that customer that they didn't have today. And they knew how to differentiate through design. So I think that's probably my most favorite example of product market fit. So you're probably asking like, well, isn't this kind of marketing? It's not really product. Let me kind of just show you the difference from a marketing perspective, but I'll also share with you that in the adoption that we did at IBM and how we're actually starting to adopt it at Stats Perform, I see it very much as a product function, but it does blur those lines between product, marketing, everything. So if you look at the difference between how a growth hacker views the world and maybe more of a traditional marketer, a growth hacker is going to be very analytical. They're going to be deeply ingrained in the product and the business. So they're going to always know what I call the vital signs of a product. What does the growth look like? What does my retention look like? What does my NPS look like? How many more trials do I have? Is that trending up or down? They're going to know all the vital signs that tell me whether I have a healthy product or not. They'll be very data driven. So they're never going to make a decision without any data. They make products people want. They focus on that. Like this is what people want. I have the data to prove it. They look for low cost tactics. So growth hacker is very scrappy in their approach. So you think about Facebook and Uber and all these companies that you know well that grew extremely fast. And you think, did they have huge marketing and product departments? No, they had growth hacking. And they focus on growth. That is their North Star as a person is growth. Whereas a traditional marketer, they're usually more creative. They do a good job of messaging and overviewing on the product. They leverage a lot of gut experience for their decisions. They basically wait for the product to be finished and then they create a campaign around people to want that product. So they're not involved in the creation and the differentiation piece. They're basically like, tell us when you're ready and we'll create a launch. They look a lot to paid media and tactics that cost a lot more money. They're less scrappy and they are always relentless pursuing the message, whereas a growth hacker is relentlessly pursuing the channels to put that message on. And usually they're much more focused on revenue, where a growth hacker is focused on growth. So if you think about how that translates and why you would build a growth team, for a couple of reasons. Core product managers, as I refer to them, are really great at managing how to get a product to market. They're great at the details of productization, the depth of the expertise to do that, the logistics behind that, the management of that, integrating with engineering, but they're not really focused on growth tactics. And that's where a lot of products end up falling short in their opportunity to get growth on the marketplace, because the product managers are working really hard to get a product out the door and they're working on managing that product, but they're really not focused on that treasure hunt of growth. And growth people are highly analytical. They're insanely curious, whereas product managers might be more organizationally curious and more organizationally inclined. Growth teams will allow you to bring products to market and accelerate growth better than anything. And if you have SaaS products or are transitioning to SaaS, I would say that this is an absolute must. And in fact, this is when I actually discovered growth hacking, is when I brought the first SaaS product to market at IBM. Also, if your product is not growing as fast as the market, it's a great idea to consider bringing in somebody who's focused on growth. In my IBM days, we took a product that was 50 years old, not growing as fast in the market, took a growth approach, and within a few years, it was one of the fastest growing products in our portfolio digitally. So it really does help to have that laser focus. So let's talk a little bit about what I learned when I started my growth team over at IBM. I first started looking at growth and growth hacking and watching a lot of webinars and reading Sean Ellis's book, who's been a great mentor to me. And I started talking about it in IBM, and people kind of looked at me like I was a little crazy. So it was really hard to be the lone voice of growth. I needed to find other analytically inclined people that shared my point of view. So I would strongly recommend, if you're thinking about that, definitely do that. It doesn't matter what size you are. You're never too big or small. A lot of people, when I first started showing up on the scene at things like Growth Hackers, thought, wow, what's IBM doing here? This is really kind of a startup-y thing. It's not. It's whether you're big or small, growth is going to be something you want to focus on. You need to find the right place to start the growth team. Sometimes that's marketing, sometimes it's product. It really depends on your organization. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I keep saying insanely curious people who are data geeks like myself. So people who are very data driven, who don't like to make decisions without data. Prepare for conflict, because this will be different and it kind of blurs those lines between those groups. Also start very small with a few little growth insights, kind of feed the organization with what you can do with growth. And then remember that growth can always come from unexpected places. So you have to make sure that you're always looking and always keeping open-minded for where that could be. All right. Okay. So I kind of talked a little bit about looking for growth anywhere. The thing about it is that I talked about it being across the entire user journey. You can find growth on something like the form that people fill out for the trial and optimizing that form. There were some cases where we had a 40% increase in the number of trials because we laser focused on why people weren't filling out that form. You could find growth for making sure that the trial download of your product goes very smoothly. You can find growth for putting in product onboarding into your product. So it's at every step of the way, and you've got to have somebody who is open to crossing all the lines of the entire customer journey. All right, so if you're new to growth, it can be overwhelming. I thought the same thing. I thought, well, who am I kidding? I'm not Facebook or Uber. I'm so out of my league with this stuff. It's not actually that hard to understand, and it's not hard to get going. So I'm going to give you some tips for how you can start looking at building a growth team in your organization. Okay, so first, we'll go through these one by one, but assess the culture, get yourself some data, start introducing the concept of product market fit, because that is the foundation. Pick the tools that you'll use, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Start to build a very small core growth team. Start small, but really advertise a lot of what you do. Then actually expand out to creating growth squads across the organization. And then there you want to focus on a lot of alignment around what you're trying to do, over communicate, and then start cranking up the experimentation engine. So let's dive in a little bit about what I mean by some of these things. So assessing the culture. So a growth team, depending on your organization, can be in product, can be in marketing, it could be a standalone team. At IBM, we originally tried to start it in marketing, and then it didn't really get legs. So we started it in product where it did get legs, and then marketing actually jumped in, and it was great when they did. And now I think it's fully embraced in IBM as a core principle. There's product managers, growth product managers, and marketing is all in on experimentation. You need a high-level sponsor. That's critical. In my case, it was our general manager. He very much believed in it. And so that gave me the ability to get people behind me and have people be open. Anything from bringing in Sean Ellis to address our leadership team, to educating people on what growth hacking is. You have to assess whether how open your culture is to experimentation and failing fast. That is scary to a lot of people. And if you're in an organization where you're not doing agile development, you're probably not building MVPs. This is a tough concept to start to build into that organization. If you are agile, you are focused on building MVPs, this is going to be a very easy cultural shift for you. And then also, is your organization data driven, or are you very short-term sales driven? I'll tell you that any public company has a tough time with this, because we're always working up against that quarterly close. And so most data-driven and growth strategies have a little bit more of a longer tail that you have to get a little bit more understanding around. So that is part of how you need to assess the culture in terms of whether your organization will embrace growth. So to be data-driven, you kind of need data. So that's a great place to start. I would find somebody who really knows the data of your organization. That was probably one of the first people that I put on my growth team, somebody who understood the data, knew where to find the data, and can help us start to tell stories with that data. And in fact, that's exactly what we started to do before we actually started to do any experimentation and growth, was we just started to give people what that data looked like around our products. So just some very basic stuff we started with, growth, retention, NPS, number of trials, conversion rates, putting that all in one place, like a chart where you could check somebody's vitals. We used a BI tool. We had Cognos, and we started there, and we started to draw some insights from where we should start from a growth perspective on improving some of these parts. So if we saw our NPS go down, we thought maybe we need to look at onboarding. If we saw retention go down, we need to maybe look at onboarding again. If we saw that our conversion rates were low, we could address that through the trial experience. So don't overwhelm the organization once you start to gather data. That's also very easy to do. And it was a big learning that I had, but make it very simple. Show them the signal, not the noise. Share the insights and some of the visualizations around that data. But start with the data, and you can start small and still be very effective. Also start with product market fit. Many organizations today are engineering or sales led. So I'm sure you've been in the position where you've had to rush to market because either an executive is asking you to do that, or sales is asking you to do that. But that is not how you're going to get product market fit, is to try and retrofit it afterwards. That's a huge cultural shift. When I joined Stats Perform, I brought in Sean Ellis, who wrote the book Hacking Growth. I highly recommend. And he did several workshops with not just my product and marketing team, but the entire organization. We kicked it off with, including engineering and our AI team, so that everybody was all in on this concept of product market fit. It's a cultural shift, because unless you have that, you can't accelerate growth. If you're not growing, you probably don't have product market fit. And it's really important to get everybody all in on that. Then you can choose your tools that you're going to work with. There's a lot out on the market. At IBM, we were religious about amplitude and segment. Segment was how we actually put the intelligence or the instrumentation into our product and our product experience. Amplitude was how we visualize the data from those from that intelligence. Today at Stats Perform, we use Mixpanel. Optimizely will help you manage your experiments and execute experiments. Hotjar helps you understand what's going on your website. There is a ton of products. I would say start with some core BI views on your product, business intelligence, and then try to shift to the point where you don't release any product without instrumentation. That's going to be the foundation. We use Mixpanel. That's going to give you a lot more information and data about how your product is doing. I'll give you another quick story. Instagram, which a lot of people know, was actually originally introduced as a product called Bourbon. And Bourbon was out on the market. It wasn't doing great. And so they thought, well, we have really great product and we're putting all of these features into it. And they kept putting more features in, but they weren't getting growth. And so they stopped what they were doing. They instrumented the product, and they found that customers were only using like 3 things. They were posting pictures, they were putting emojis on, they were adding comments. That was it. So they thought, all right, what if we just do those 3 things really, really well and really different, very new design, new user experience. And they relaunched his Instagram. And then within, I think, a year, maybe, it was sold to Facebook for a crazy amount of money. So product market fit is the difference between growth and success and stagnation if you don't get it right. And I think that the ability to see that, what's happening in your product, you need more than NPS, because that's going to give you a point in time. Instrumentation like Segment, Mixpanel, those kind of products where you can actually build the intelligence into the product experience is absolutely essential. You want to build your core team. I would say start small. Find somebody, like I said, who really knows the data. The other person you'll need is a digital strategist who can use tools like Optimizely. So someone who can say, if we change this button or we do this and we run this experiment and get statistical relevance, what does that look like? How do I measure that? How do we know success? Somebody who can constantly run those experiments. Optimizely is a great tool for that. You need to align with marketing or bring marketing into your core team, because they're going to own those marketing assets that are part of that journey that you need when you're assessing growth. User research is also extremely key. We didn't do anything without design involved, including the way we ran and iterated on the experiments, because that whole user experience and UI was critical to us getting it right. And then SEO expertise is also extremely helpful. If you have a mature product like we had at IBM, many mature products, you really need to understand the search part of the growth challenge that you've got on your plate. Or if you have a new product, you got to make sure that you're doing some things to optimize SEO at all time. There's some really interesting tools on the marketplace that allow you to just scrape your content from your web pages and check to see how you can do a better job on optimizing SEO. So some great tools to help you do that, and having this core expertise, I think, is a great foundation. Start with some big backing. You need to have a critical, the critical thing is to have the right sponsorship and to make sure that you are constantly updating that small and focused group of interested users around what you're doing. So start small, so you can prove out the results, so you can explain the results very clearly, and start anywhere in the client journey. You don't have to start in any particular place. It really depends on the maturity of your product, where you're at, what you're aiming to do, and make sure you're getting lots of user feedback. That is extremely important, because where you do find growth, you want to jump on it and double down and really accelerate with that. As you build out, you can start what we call growth squads. And that's where we started to expand out across the organization. Start to rally around a particular North Star, whether it's around a product or around the company. Be careful not to make the squads too large, but this is where you start to take your core team and expand out into include marketing, include product, include engineering, include design, and really have a North Star around that product. This starts to help create more of a divide from regular core product management to growth product management. The way we worked it at IBM was that we worked in tandem. So a core product manager brought products to market and managed those products, and they worked with the growth product team, which is the team that I had, to accelerate the growth once that product was in market. And prepare for conflict, because you are introducing a new concept. People will feel like you're treading on their space, whether it's marketing or whether it's design or whether it's product, because you're in marketing. This is one of those organizations that kind of overlaps everything. It crosses many areas. And so many people who tell you have built growth teams, there is a lot of contention and conflict until everybody starts to really rally around a North Star and functions more aligned in a growth team. Having that alignment is going to help a lot. Use the North Star metric or OKRs or whatever you do to drive that. Having a senior executive sponsor be behind you. Do not alienate marketing if you start growth in product, and don't alienate product if you start growth in marketing. You got to create that strong alignment. Development will also have to be in the boat, because if you want to actually create instrumentation within the product, they also have to be all in. So you want to make sure that you have alignment across these organizations, especially as you scale out the growth team, and then leverage the feedback and the relationships and include everyone in celebrating success. Because you're in growth, there's not going to be one silver bullet. There's going to be lots of small successes that lead you down a path of accelerated growth. Communication's super key. We do a monthly newsletter. We would also do quarterly QBRs. But because growth is a new concept, you really have to work overtime to explain to the organization exactly what you're doing. What is instrumentation? Why does it matter? What do I get out of that? What does this data mean? I would suggest creating a dashboard that you can push out, a communication plan that you share on a consistent basis, and involve the entire organization in filling the experiment pipeline. That's really, really important. So it shouldn't be just a small group of people that are doing this. None of us is as good as all of us. And having the entire organization contribute to what should we experiment with is really, really important. And then you want to start cranking up that experiment engine. You want to be very methodical, track everything you do. There are tools out there for that. Growth Hackers actually has a tool that do it. Some people just start off doing it in Excel. But start with the low-hanging fruit for your product. Go after increasing trials, go after conversion rates, go after onboarding, go after some of the things that you think are broken that cause retention issues. No experiments too small or too big. You're going to have experiments that run a week and experiments that run for several weeks. But you shouldn't discriminate. Just go after wherever you can find it. And I would say start small and somewhere in around 3 to 5 experiments every few weeks, and then expand out. Very efficient growth organizations run as much as 20 experiments. They do a lot of small ones weekly. That takes a level of sophistication and a lot of organization around that. But starting off small and cranking it up over time is exactly what you want to do. So that is all of the content I have. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. And I also put my Twitter handle as well as a couple of your sports fans. Those are Twitter handles you'll probably want to follow. If you're a football fan, Opta Joe is a big one. And if you're American sports fan, Stats by Stats. It was some great data-driven stories. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Nancy. This was a great session. Great insights indeed. So we have a question in chat section. Also, I'd like to mention that we have our audiences on LinkedIn live as well. So I'll route some questions from there. So for now, let's take this question from Nivedita. Could you see that in chat section? Are you able to see?
I can't actually see it. I can't see the chat session, so you'll probably have to read it to me from my view.
So she asked us, how is digital marketing different from growth hacking? What should be the goal of a digital marketer when it comes to growth hacking?
So that's a great question. So going back to the slide I had between marketing, traditional marketing, she's asking about digital marketing. There's not a lot of big difference as long as you realize that your digital marketing focus is across the entire journey, not just filling the front end of the pipeline. A lot of times in marketing, we think, well, our job is done when the pipeline is full. That's not true, right? Our job is done when we continue to fill that pipeline, but also as how customers experience the product. The product experience is everything. It's how easy it is to find it on when I do a search. It's how easy it is to download a trial. It's how easy it is to buy it. It's how easy it is to get in and find some value from it. And as a digital marketer or a growth person, you should be concerned with every aspect of that journey. That's really the key difference, is that your work doesn't start in just creating opportunity. It's growing that opportunity.
Right. I hope that answers your question, Nivedita. So our next question is from Nishant. So he is actually a startup travel company, and he was doing really great for the last 5 years, apparently. So he asks us, how should I alter my growth strategy after the market opens up again? So I think he's referring to the pandemic. So with the help of growth hacking, how do I go ahead with the new plan?
I think the first thing is to get a group of people together within your organization and start to think differently, because as we had to do with COVID in sports tech, when there was no sports, you have to sometimes redefine what growth means to you. So you might have had a North Star of, we want to create this many clients by the end of the year. COVID might have altered that North Star. So what is your new North Star? What are you going for within this crazy pandemic year that we're having? How are you going to redefine growth? And how will you measure that? And what are some of the ideas? And I would involve everybody in the organization about some interesting ideas about how you could actually redefine that and try some things that'll spark growth. My big inspiration at IBM, you'll love this story, is that I actually went searching for growth stories that were more around mature products, because everything that I found was actually based on startups. And I found inspiration in a product called Jägermeister, which is a drink that's been around forever. And Jägermeister actually was a very complex product. It had been around for, I think, about 80 years, not selling very well, selling about 70,000 bottles a year in the UK. And so they were trying to figure out, how do they spark growth, which is kind of where you're at. How do I spark growth? In the case of Jägermeister, they came up with this little thing called the Jaeger bomb. So they didn't change the product, they changed how the product was consumed. And so they thought, because it was too hard to change the product, so they just added this Red Bull shot, and they built a marketing campaign around the Jaeger bomb. And they went from selling 70,000 bottles a year within a year to 700,000 bottles a year. And now they're 40% of the shots in the UK pubs. So in that case, it was looking at how the customer experiences the product differently, spark some growth. So look at it from all angles and come up with some new thoughts about how you would redefine growth and how you could spark growth, even if it means how you change the experience of your product based on the pandemic.
Thank you for that answer, Nancy. I'm a huge fan of Jägermeister myself. Love that drink. It's a German origin drink, right?
It is a German drink. Yeah, it was a great. It's my
so we
favorite
do
growth
have in
story.
India as well the Vega bombs that you were talking about. Yeah. Right. The questions, I think that's about it. We do not have any more questions, but I'm sure the audience will reach out to you on LinkedIn or other platforms in case if they have any in mind. So it was indeed a great session, Nancy. And I'll just give the audience a minute actually to see if they want to ask a few more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So audience, I encourage you all to scan the QR code and ask your questions right away. Let's make the best of the session.
Hopefully I inspired some people out there with a little bit of growth.
Oh yes,
knowledge.
absolutely. This was a great session. I'm sure even if they
good.
weren't able to attend, we will share the video across all our platforms and among all our alumni. This was a great session indeed.
Everybody's rushing to go find the Jaeger bombs.
Oh, it's still the daytime for you, Nancy.
It's still, yeah, not for me. There's no Jaeger bombs in my near future.
So we are already at 9 o'clock. So good for us. All right, then. So I think the audience will reach out to you on LinkedIn. So proceeding with the session. We have enjoyed having you with us, Nancy. It has been a complete pleasure. So please accept the certificate of appreciation from the Institute. And if you scan the QR code there, it will take you to the recording of the session. And you can share your recording among your community, and we will be doing the same. We have a YouTube channel, so we'll be sharing that on the same. We are grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and amazing insights drawn from your years of research and experience in the industry. So I'm certain that our audience will definitely benefit from the methods you suggested and get ahead in their career. So
excellent. I wish everybody the best of growth.
Yeah. So thank you so much once again for joining us. And audience, thank you for joining in. It was great interacting with you all. Do not forget to register for our upcoming webinars. With that note, I end tonight's session. Happy learning and stay skilled. Thank you again, Nancy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.